Okay, good afternoon everybody to this NCFE sponsored roundtable. Very topical this afternoon because of course we've just had arguably one of the most significant announcements from the government in relation to further education in about a decade, and some of the people we might be hearing from will obviously have a view on that. But I'm delighted to have so many important people from the world of further education on this particular roundtable and to hear their views with regarding, as I say, this announcement which took place by the Prime Minister Boris Johnson on the 28th of September when he went to Exeter College to announce something that was called the Lifetime Skills Guarantee, which would come into effect from April of next year. And that was to include a, quote, new entitlement to flexible loans for higher education courses in both further education colleges and universities, as well as offering adults that don't have an A-level or equivalent first full level 3 qualification the opportunity to do a fully funded one, not just as is now for the 19 to 24-year-olds, but those aged 25 and over as well would be eligible for their first fully funded full level 3, and that will be funded from an entirely new pot of funding that was announced in the Conservatives' manifesto known as the National Skills Fund. And in fact, just today, the Skills Minister, Gillian, Keegan, who we'll be hearing from on this roundtable later, announced in a ministerial statement that the National Retraining Fund, hope you're keeping up, is to be subsumed within the National Skills Fund. National Skills Fund will work out at about £600 million a year for the rest of this Parliament, totalling £2.5 billion of new money, in addition to a further £500 million, which will be going to the devolved nations as part of the Barnett formula. So £3 billion essentially for courses, and in addition to that, £1.5 billion for capital, specifically at colleges. So very significant reform programme, new policies being announced all the time, and we're all eagerly awaiting a skills white paper in the autumn, which I think we're in now. So any minute now, or certainly hopefully before the new year, we'll get a look at some of the policy detail as well as any legislative changes that will be required, particularly around level 4 and 5. And some of you may have seen as well that there was a second round for the Institutes of Technology. Another round of tender has just gone out of those, very much all about level 4 and 5 in terms of that particular policy announcement. And all that happening, of course, whilst we're dealing with the pandemic and concerns around jobs at the moment, jobs in the future, all very much tied up in, of course, further education and skills sector. So delighted to be chairing this particular roundtable. We are joined this afternoon by I'll just quickly list everyone because it is quite a long list, but I think it'd be useful just to name everyone off the bat before we hear from them. So delighted that later we'll be hearing from Gillian, Keegan MP, the Skills Minister, on the front bench. And then from the shadow bench, we have Toby Perkins MP, who is the Shadow Skills Minister, so Gillian Keegan's opposite number. A former skills minister, or lifelong learning, I think was actually back in the day, was in the title, in the form of Gordon Marsden. We're also going to be hearing from Shane Chowen, an area director at the Association of Colleges and former FE vice president at the National Union of Students. We're going to be hearing from two people from the Association of Employment Learning Providers in the form of the managing director, Jane Hickie, and the director of research, Paul Warner. Also looking forward to hearing contributions from Stephen Evans, the Chief Executive of the Learning Work Institute, Ali Hawadi, the Principal and Chief Executive for the Central Bedfordshire College. From the independent sector, we have Brenda McLeish, Chief Executive of the Learning Curve Group. And again, many thanks to our sponsor, NCFE and Cash, the Chief Executive being David Gallagher. And I think that should about cover everything in terms of all the different kind of representative bodies and interested parties within the skills sector. So fantastic lineup of people to hear from at a really important juncture ahead of the white paper and with lots of new money coming for the further education and skills sector. So without further ado, I'd like first to introduce David Gallagher, Chief Executive for NCFE, and again, very grateful to him and NCFE for sponsoring the roundtable. David, would you like to begin?
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Nick. And I won't speak for too long today, actually, which probably is a surprise to some of you that know me quite well. But I just thought I would, I suppose, touch on why I think these sorts of conversations are hugely important, and then what I see as, I suppose, some of the key questions. So the first thing to say is NCFE, for those of you that don't know, we're an educational charity. predominantly have core operations in awarding, assessment, learning analytics, learning content, where we partner with great organisations like Learning Curve to produce really high quality content. So we support the sector in lots of different ways. And as a charity, I suppose we've got an obligation to the Charities Commission. We've got an obligation to our stakeholders to make sure that we deploy our resources to best effect in the sector, to make sure that the sector is as vibrant and as healthy and gets the best possible deal for learners as possible. And so that really, I suppose, has led us to thinking about making sure that as we are at this pivotal point, not just in education, but in the world more broadly, you know, we're Industry 4.0, the long heralded Great Reset, dynamically changing economy, all sorts of challenges in society. There's a hell of a lot of change going on right now. And as we're at those real key turning points, that we have balanced, well-rounded, well-considered, evidence-based dialogue to inform those next steps. And it's my view that at the moment, not all of the conversation is necessarily balanced. For example, we quite often hear the word colleges, but just colleges. Well, what about private training providers? What about awarding organisations? What about incredible think tanks, incredible charities that are out there? You know, the organisations that invest really heavily in making sure that our educational ecosystem is vibrant, is innovative, is creative, responsive and agile. And colleges, I think, have a hugely important role in that, but it's not all just about colleges. And so I think that to have a really balanced conversation to make sure that the system is as healthy as possible and fit for purpose of the future, we've got to speak to a broad range of stakeholders. And so that was why I was quite keen, and just in some small way, to put our money where our charitable purpose is and facilitate, you know, broader conversations. So for me today, the key questions around a lifetime skills guarantee: what is it? What does it actually mean? You know, earlier this year we heard about an apprenticeship guarantee, and then that was you know, that balloon sort of slowly ran out of air and fizzled off. I'm sure a lifetime skills guarantee won't be the same, but the devil, of course, is always in the detail. So what does it mean, and what do we think it should mean? What can be bought in terms of the government contribution to this? What is the role and the investment of employers? What is the role and investment of individuals, and whether that's individuals contributing cash or contributing time? And I've had a long held belief that actually your time is more valuable than your cash. So if we ask learners to undertake something, we've got a moral duty to make sure that it's really high quality and really valuable provision that people invest their incredibly important time in. How do we ensure quality and value of provision? Do you know, I think that almost all of us will remember things such as Train to Gain, where there was fantastic provision delivered, but there was also a lot of waste in the process. Individual learner accounts, you can go on prior. How do we collectively hold ourselves and others to account to make sure that real high quality, real value is added through whatever provision is delivered through this offer? How do we make sure we get the balance between economic needs and societal needs? We quite often hear about employer demand, but how do we make sure that we best serve society, we best serve the communities and those learners and learner groups that need the greatest support? Incredibly important. And so the definition of high value, I think, is a crucial question. And then the final point I wanted to make, and then I will stop rabbiting on, is how do we ensure responsiveness and agility as we, you know, move to what some are now describing as a post-market system? How does this system remain responsive and agile to the needs of an incredibly dynamically shifting labour market, to rapidly changing societal context? How do we make sure that the quality, that the currency of what we deliver equips people to, you know, not just have great experiences, but to get the best possible outcomes, to prepare them particularly for career, but also for life more broadly. So they're the questions, you know, some big questions in there, I think. But for me, the lifetime skills guarantee, what does it mean, or what should it mean? Who pays for it? Who invests what to make sure it's sustainable in the long term? How do we ensure quality and value? And how do we ensure that we have a responsive and agile tertiary and particularly vocational and technical education ecosystem, not monolithic institutions? So that's it from me. Thank you for the opportunity to sponsor this event. I'm really looking forward to listening into the conversation. Thanks, Nick.
Great, thank you, David, and again, thanks again for sponsoring the roundtable. I'm going to start with Ali, if that's okay. Ali Hadawi is, of course, the Chief Executive and the Principal at Central Bedfordshire Colleges. The reason I want to start with you, Ali, is because further education colleges are absolutely front and centre, it would appear, in the announcements. We have, as I mentioned before, £1.5 billion of capital spending, and I think you've probably just been just as we speak, being thrown maybe £1 million or so to spend quite quickly, but there's more in the longer term, we know. And of course, in terms of the first full level 3s, this will already be quite a significant course offer that you already deliver. And the change we've heard about from April is broadening that out to, I guess, avoid learners using loans and instead be funded, fully funded for those courses from April. So, Ali, we're going to hear from the independent sector shortly, but from a college's perspective and what you're hearing in terms of what you already do, in terms of the timescales, can we get some opening thoughts from yourself, please? And you'll need to turn your microphone on.
Yeah? Okay. Well, Nick and Shane and colleagues, good afternoon. Thank you very much indeed for the invite. I think there's an opportunity here. And the opportunity is to rethink the sets of relationships that govern adult education. And that is for whether it's adult community learning, whether it's the private training provider sector or further education colleges. I think what sits at the heart of that in terms of how I look at this is that a level of trust in the professional, that what needs to be done is what is going to be delivered. And I absolutely agree with David's point earlier in terms of how the whole bit, all the different elements of the sector, whether it's a provider or a funder or an awarding organization, how do they all work together to enable people to get to where they want to get to? Essentially, the things that we work on are only 3 things. We supply skills into the economy, we help community cohesion, and we help people as a collective in terms of their own social and mental well-being. And I don't think it's beyond our wit and the wit of policymakers to come up with metrics that start to measure these as opposed to just success rates. I think success rates have got a time and a place in the system, absolutely, but they can't be a proxy for everything that is going. And I think in terms of what policymakers are actually after from pumping all of this funding into the system is to change realities on the ground in terms of local economies, in terms of supply of skills, in terms of people being able to rethink themselves and have new and fresh aspirations. And all of these could be done really, really well. We have got a technical and vocational education system that is world leading. It really is. And I think it's hampered by the levels of control and the, I would call, primitive measures that are there in place to control funding, to control success, to control what works and what doesn't work, whilst we have a whole host of measures that could easily be, I'm not talking about easily as in simplistic, they're not, but it's not beyond our wit to come up with the right measures that would enable funding to flow to where it needs to, and to enable difference to be really, really made to societies, communities, and individuals. And if there's one lesson that we could learn from the current pandemic, how it's playing out in different geographies, it's telling us that what works locally needs to be adapted to that locality, whatever it is. I can't think of what is different in Liverpool from Manchester. But clearly the numbers are saying there's something that is happening in Liverpool that potentially is different from Manchester. And it's people there, the college, the university, educators could come up with the systems provided there is enough trust in the system. If I've gone far too long, give me a wave. But I think what sits at the heart of that is a high quality information, advice, and career guidance system that is well funded, and it's not the same one as the one for 16 to 18-year-olds, because the needs, aspirations, and the pressures and life challenges that are thrown at adults are different from 16 to 18-year-olds. And hence what we need that sits at the heart of this system is a signposting and navigation system that is tailored for the needs of adults. And I think that is critically important. We have got the know-how as a country. We know what needs to be done, but for some reason that is always missing. It's always tagged on to what schools and colleges provide. And it's not Job Centre Plus, incidentally, because job centres have got a different purpose, and we can't tag these things onto them.
Okay.
And I think there's also a need for a change to, I think there's a signal to the regulatory system that would then enable success to be tangible. I will stop now and I'll carry on hopefully later.
Thank you, Ali. I'm really interested in some of the things you said, well, all the things, but certainly at the start there about some of the wider outcomes and not relying, as the sector has always done, and it's been a bugbear of mine, many of you know, has always done. It's been incentivised, arguably over-incentivised by the number of qualifications and whether people pass them or not, or as you call them, success rates. So I will come on to have a chat with Stephen Evans about the wider outcomes issue, because I know in his capacity at the Learning and Work Institute, that's an area in terms of incentivising wider outcomes that have been quite busy of late. Before we do that, I thought it'd be really great to hear from Brenda McLeish. Brenda is, of course, Chief Executive for Learning Curve Group, who are a training provider delivering courses funded through the adult education budget, apprenticeships, and other means. But having just now heard from a principal, I thought it was only fair we also hear from an independent provider. I know you all work together, but just for balance, can we get some opening thoughts, Brenda, from yourself, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Nick. I think, so Learning Curve Group generally delivers to around about 50,000 learners a year. Of those, the vast majority are adults. Around about 2,000 are 16 to 18-year-olds. And we deliver right across the full spectrum: study programme, apprenticeships, traineeships, adult education, ESF, etc., etc. And therein lie probably my first point. I think that the introduction of this is welcome. The additional funding is more than welcome, but we need to be really careful that we don't get caught up in even more bureaucracy that ties us up in red tape. So the scheme's due to start in April. We're yet to understand what the detail is. We're yet to understand what the relative fundable qualifications might be, and therefore we can't plan for the curriculum delivery that's attached to it. I think the other thing that's really telling for us I say post-COVID, we're not post-COVID, are we yet? But during the ensuing aftermath of COVID is that we're starting to see a different type of adult learner. And I think that this shouldn't be forgotten. I think that we're starting to see many more adults who are actually well qualified, might indeed already have a level 3, but due to the current situation are needing to unfortunately switch vocational tracks. And I'd be very interested to see how this fund will help to support some of those learners, because it very much talks about firstness. And given that differentiating group of learners we're seeing now, that mix of economy is not going to be supported. I'm also very concerned about our long-term unemployed and those disadvantaged groups getting left behind as we start to focus on some of these higher level skills, and what additional funding and support we can put in place to make sure that they don't get pushed further and further down the track as we see more people come onto that unemployment register. I think it's a really great point that David made about that mixed economy. There's a part to play here for colleges, training providers, everybody else, and that mixed landscape of providers is absolutely essential. As we've seen, private providers deliver a significant proportion of the adult loans budget, and one would hope that that superb delivery would be escalated even further with this additional funding that will replace some of those learners requiring a loan. I think that the point that was made about quality of providers is essential. We mustn't have another train to gain experience. We must make sure that we don't just open the floodgates and end up with an influx of hit it quick and get, make ourselves rich quick and get out without good quality outcomes. I think we also need to think about some of the lessons learned from devolution. In some of the devolved areas, we've seen very selective choosing of what curriculum will be funded. And it doesn't always meet that LMI. It doesn't always match what the local jobs market is telling us, and is more aspirational about those devolved areas than actually where the jobs are. So they're just a few of my thoughts, Nick. I hope that's useful.
Thank you, Brenda. That's great. I'm going to try and pull together two aspects from both Ali and yourself, Brenda, around the incentivising the wider outcomes. And then, Brenda, there you talked about whether independent sector would get a fair crack at this National Skills Fund in the context there of the advanced learner loans and replacing what you already deliver. So I wanted to bring those two together in the context of a new National Skills Fund. We don't know what the funding methodology will be. We don't know how and if it will be tendered. But actually, it could well be that the funding methodology is a bit more DWP-esque, if Stephen doesn't mind me referring to it that way, around those wider outcomes. It presents the DFE, the department and the ministers with a potential bit of a blank piece of paper rather than trying to amend the adult education budget. So in that vein, in terms of the provider base and what we're incentivising, I wonder if I could bring in Stephen Evans, who is, of course, the Chief Executive for the Learning and Work Institute, and some thoughts there and some of the work that you've been doing in the last kind of couple of years, really.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. I mean, first of all, it's great to be having a conversation about more investment after a decade of cuts. So this new announcement and the new funding is really, really welcome and positive. I think there's a bit of a tension that's come out of the discussion and in your introduction there, Nick, between a sense that we need to free up people to make choices, and people will make the right choices for their personal circumstances, and providers and colleges need freedom to get on with things, versus you know, this entitlement is going to be limited to a set of level 3 qualifications that the Department for Education will at some point set out, which I think will be in line with the industrial strategy. So you've got this tension between individual choice and provider freedom versus do we need to sort of direct things a little bit centrally, and that's a tension that plays through lots of other policy discussions that will come through in the white paper later. And then I think that feeds through into what you were saying about what's our measure of success here. So qualifications really matter. You know, we've argued for funding of modules of qualifications as well as full qualifications, but actually there's a purpose and there's an ultimate purpose. So some of the work we've been doing with the GLA, for example, is to look at, well, what are some of the outcomes, both economic and social, of learning, and how can we get a handle on some of those? So how many people get into work if that's the aim of the provision? How many people get on at work if it's about progression? How many people improve their health and well-being outcomes, which is so important to a lot of learning at level 3 and below it as well. And I guess what I'm really looking for, you always sort of welcome what you've got and then you want more. I think we need a vision for what's the system as a whole going to look like. It feels like we've got various building blocks, but some of them are missing. I'm not quite sure what picture we're trying to make at the moment, at the risk of mixing my metaphors. And so what I would say is, well, let's have a basket of economic and social outcomes, and let's think about how all of those services join together, whether they're employment services or health services or local government services or whatever, and then measure those sets of outcomes and focus a bit on that as what we're trying to achieve, as well as qualifications. So I'm not saying just ditch qualifications, I don't think that would be right, but I think we need that wider basket of outcomes, and we know how to do this. We've done lots of pilots, there's lots of other people looked at it as well. We just need to get on with it really, but it has to derive from that systems thinking, which I'm hoping is something that the white paper will talk about.
Thank you, Stephen. Really interesting stuff, and I'm very much looking forward to the white paper. Speaking of which, one of the key players, of course, in the drafting and then publishing of the white paper is the Skills Minister, Gillian Keegan, and then, of course, on the other side of the bench, Toby Perkins, the Shadow Skills Minister, both of whom have now joined us after fulfilling their democratic duty, as I understand it. When the bell rings, you go and vote, which I believe has just taken place. I have no idea what the vote is about, possibly food standards or something similar at the moment, but you may want to let us know. But the key thing is that you're here for this particular debate about the skills guarantee and the various announcements ahead of the white paper. And I saw just this morning that the Skills Minister, Gillian Keegan, made a ministerial statement about the National Retraining Scheme being folded into the National Skills Fund. So it's all about the National Skills Fund. And Toby and Gillian, if you missed it, we were having an interesting conversation about that, in a sense, blank piece of paper. What might it look like? And how much needs to be done before April? So really looking forward to hearing from both Gillian and Toby. So if it's okay with you, Minister, I'm going to hand over to you for some remarks, if that's okay. But you will need to turn the microphone.
I've unmuted. Right, well, thank you. Thanks, Nick. And well, thank you for setting this up. It is an important event for us to host, for you to host, and for us to get together to sort of start to shape the ideas of the lifetime skills guarantee and post-16 education, and all this investment that's coming, which I would probably say the sector, and certainly I see Gordon here, has probably been, they've probably been looking for this for a long time. So the fact that we're getting more focus on further education, getting more focus on technical education, on top of the focus on apprenticeships, is something I know that we will all welcome. And we know what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to make sure that everybody has the skills they need to succeed, and we all have a key role to play in doing that. I think you all know that I am absolutely passionate about technical education, apprenticeships. I did an apprenticeship, I was an apprentice myself, I went to an FE college. I've worked in highly technical businesses for 30 years. I kind of feel like when I joined the Department for Education, it was a natural home for me. Already lots of work was underway to basically fix what I have seen as been a problem, with some of the obvious solutions for many, many years. But that's from the perspective of being a business person, who are ultimately our customers here. We've got customers which are our learners, and the businesses who are the employers as well, who will basically, it's where the rubber hits the road of all our hard work, everything we've been doing throughout a young person's education, that will allow them to, or a returner, somebody who's coming back to get that second shot in life. So the Prime Minister and the Education Secretary, I think you could say, if you've been watching, are pretty passionate about this area as well. We're challenging decades-old and outdated views about what further and technical education are. The sector will no longer be overlooked, underserved, or come in second place behind university education. And as somebody who's kind of always been in second place, I feel quite passionate about that, and certainly understand very firsthand the difference a high quality apprenticeship or a high quality technical education can make to a young person's life. In my first 6 weeks as Apprenticeships and Skills Minister, which was the period before coronavirus, so BC, every meeting I had was about massive skills shortages. That was the only agenda item. Well, apart from, can I have more financial freedom and less accountability, which is AKA known as the lobby. But apart from that, every meeting was about massive skills shortages, and in every sector: nursing, policing, mental health, social care, engineering, construction, everything digital, anything to do with anything technical, and then a whole load more on top. The creative sector, all talking about a massive shortage of skills. And that's because there's been, if not one, but at least one, in some industries, 2 big technological shifts in recent years. And our skills agenda has not kept up with it. That's why I'm very excited that the investment that's been made in the apprenticeship standards, in T levels, in building the employer-led standards, that foundation, which isn't a perfect foundation, but is a pretty solid foundation for us to be confident to invest more in this sector. We know already before coronavirus this was important, while coronavirus has just made it even more important. The skills shortages that we have are still there, but the time we thought we had to change aspects of our economy that we knew were on some kind of long-term decline has been accelerated really, really quickly. So we have some good foundations, but we don't have everything we need. However, the need has been brought forward in a way. That can feel like a challenge, and it can feel frustrating for some, but it's also a massive opportunity that you're in the right place at the right time with the right focus, with some of the building blocks, with the need that's just grown, that I hope will be you know, a key driver for us all to be able to work together on this. I think, you know what the lifetime skills guarantee is. It's around about making adults, enable in adults at any stage, at any age, to be able to access further education, either via an apprenticeship with a day release or via short-term courses which are modular but will build up to something meaningful, or long full-time study. So a variety of flexible and modular uses. It's kind of been designed that way in the past, and many other countries do it. But of course, it's easier said than done when you're talking about massive skills delivered across massive number of providers all across the country to a great level, you know, a great standard, with the businesses' involvement as well. Second careers will be the new norm. This is absolutely the case. I've known that myself. Is why I'm sat here. This is my second career. I didn't want to do the same thing for another 30 years. So, you know, this is what will happen for many people. And we know that we have a much wider skills agenda in terms of the technology and the skills that we need in our country. I'll leave you with this because I know we haven't got much time. You all know, you've heard about the funding. You know that we're investing in IoTs. You know, we're investing in T-levels. We're putting our money where our mouth is, etc. But you know, we know that for too long, actually, the businesses as well in our economy, for too long, we have been relying on the free availability of labour. We have quite a low skills road that we've chosen in the country. It's why we've got low productivity, why we had almost no unemployment, very, very low levels of unemployment before the pandemic. And, you know, people were there and, you know, were looking for jobs in a way. And there's a lot of relatively low skilled employment that's resulted as, you know, as it's there as a result of that. And that was something we wanted to change anyway. Now we definitely need to change that. We need to invest in the skills. We need to give people that confidence that they need to get back on the learning ladder, and the government is determined to be there, as I know all of you will be determined to be there. And I'm sure that we can design a system that in many years' time we'll look back on and feel very proud that we were part of this journey to improving the option and offer for adults all over this country to get skills that are highly valuable in the workplace.
Thank you for those comments. I'm mindful, Gillian, that your time is quite limited, and when you do have to go, we'll continue with the round table. If it's okay, before we have a kind of response, as it were, from the Shadow Skills Minister, Toby Perkins, I have a few questions, as you would expect from a journalist and representing FE Week. Now, on the 28th of September, that was the big announcement, as I mentioned earlier, Boris Johnson, Prime Minister, over at Exeter College. All very exciting. I suggested it was perhaps one of the biggest announcements in a decade, if not more. I've been within the sector. I worked 7 years at a college, but I've been reporting on it for the last 10 years at least. Huge announcement coming off the back of the grant and capital funding commitments in the manifesto, which we're now starting to see follow through in the policies themselves. Now I know, and I'm going to put words in Ali's mouth here, but the principal on the line, that the first thing that would have happened is that a lot of adults would have said, when can I have my free course, as far as those first full level 3s for all ages is concerned. And my understanding is it's from April, but the key question, which actually Stephen raised, is which qualifications will be eligible for to be free, because there are, I think I reported in an editorial, a couple of thousand at the moment that are first full level 3s, and that will need to get whittled down. Can you just give us an insight into how those decisions are made, and maybe most importantly, when Ali can let his learners know whether they would be eligible based on which courses have been selected to be part of the guarantee?
Well, the first thing is, the reason it's April is because we want to consult on you know, which kind of, well, we're going to provide more details, and we want to just figure out which courses there are. They've been really focused, and I think you could see a little bit of this in the skills recovery plan, really focused on those areas that we think we have massive skills shortages. That's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to focus the efforts that meet the labour market needs. And for too long, by the way, not just the FE sector, the HE sector have not always had that focus, and therefore we have had this sort of growing disconnect between what businesses, and this is natural, this has happened in every country I've worked around the world, you know, what you need and what you know, the skills that are coming through from the FE sector and the HE sector. There's always some mismatch, but it's kind of it's more pronounced when you've had big tech shifts. So you know, that's what we'll be focused on, and it'll be really looking at labour market needs, which, you know, I mentioned some of the shortages before. There's quite a wide range of shortages, so there will be a wide range of you know, courses that cover those shortages, but it's really going to be focused on that, and we will be, you know, we will be making sure that we've been talking to a number of people about it already, but we will be setting out those details in due course, not too long now.
Yeah, because pretty much everyone on the round table will be familiar with things like the Nigel Whitehead review. We've kind of had quite a lot of rounds of trying to whittle down the qualifications to the ones that should be high priority over the last decade. Pretty much every year the minister will announce that that they've stripped out X numbers of thousands of quals and done it in a very sort of powerful way. So in many ways this is kind of, we've heard this before, but there'll be others like David David Gallagher sponsoring the session roundtable at an awarding organisation, who will very much want to know which products are counted and which ones aren't. Are you able to put a bit more kind of meat on the bone, as it were, around timing for this? Because there's a lot of very interested parties that are very keen to know when they will know what these qualifications will be selected and published.
Yeah, I mean, we're hoping, you know, we're working on it right now, so we're hoping that we can give you some more information in the next couple of months, so, you know, hopefully by November. So that's what we're kind of working to. But you know, the teams are working on it right now, and I think we've got, you know, you say that there's been a number of attempts at this. I don't know what's happened to those attempts, but they haven't worked, because there's 12,000 level 3 qualifications. So whatever's happened, they haven't actually resulted in the high quality level 3 that the businesses want. And that's not just businesses, at every organisation. You know, we've worked very hard to try and bring employers into these standards, and that's sort of obviously the basis that we need to build on. And this opportunity's coming, I guess, a little bit before what we would have been doing as a matter of course before coronavirus. So we're just going to have to move a bit quicker. But I think, you know, if you look at some of the labour market shortages, it's pretty clear to see, you know, some of the areas where they'll be. And the other thing I'll say is they have to be high quality, and they have to be qualifications that the organisations and the businesses respect and think are the right ones. So if you are working on something which, you know, every year has loads of people going off into great jobs because the businesses or that sector really values that qualification, then, you know, they're the kind of ones that we'll be looking to focus on, assuming that they're in areas that we do have labour shortages. And I know this is easier said than done, but you know, I will say that whatever's been done before, it hasn't achieved much in terms of a reduction in the number of or a focus in terms of the qualifications, which makes it incredibly difficult for businesses and individuals to choose what to do.
Yeah, it'll be fascinating. I mean, there are currently 1,200 funded full level 3, so whittling that down, and the process, which typically happens in quite a transparent fashion. Which
12,000?
No, it's just 1,200 first full level 3s. Sorry,
oh,
full level 3s. Yeah, in terms of full level 3 qualifications that are fundable to ESFA, it's I don't want to be too scientific about it, but it's 1,249.
Yeah.
So those are the ones, no doubt, which will be, because under the legal entitlement, there'll have to be a process, and it'll be fascinating and a real indicator for the rest of the sector once it's concluded, exactly what's on the mind of those in power and policy making. Finally, on that note, one of the things I also looked at and talked about in my editorial was the role of Professor Allison Wolfe, Baroness Wolfe, who, of course, until the Prime Minister was appointed to the position, was very vocal in our sector as a professor from King's College London. She was the author of the 14 to 19 review in 2011. Also, as you'll know, on the panel for the Sainsbury report, which is where the T-levels emanated from. Now on secondment to number 10. And we've written at FE quite a bit about as a policy advisor there, how instrumental she could be, or perhaps now is being. Are you able, we can't hear from her now anymore, of course, but in terms of a roundtable discussing future policy, how influential is Allison proving to be, and what relation like with number 10, because obviously they play their in policy making at the moment?
Well, I think, you know, there's no doubt that we have a number of things that have been informing our policy and policy development. You mentioned the Sainsbury review, and then of course the Auger review, and Allison was involved in both of those. So it's good to have that consistency of thought, that academic rigor as well, in terms of how they've approached you know, the sort of both of those reviews, which have definitely been a big part of informing where we're going, and are a big part of the skills white paper, the FE reform and skills white paper that we are pulling together right now, and you know, our spending review bid as well. So they're definitely building on the foundations, and there's a lot of logic. If you look at those, they have actually built on each other in terms of, you know, the technical education, getting the qualifications right, and then looking at the relationship between HE and FE, and the investment levels that were required for FE to enable FE to be a much bigger part of technical education, and really identifying the sort of missing levels that we had time, you know, the level 4, 5, which, you know, when I was doing my apprenticeship, you know, everybody went on to do your HNCs, HNDs, and then if you carried on further, you could do your degree as well. That was you know, well, I wouldn't say it was a standard approach for the type of apprenticeship I did, it was, but you know, if you were lucky enough to get one of those, and they seem to have really disappeared a bit from the landscape. So that was another thing that they focused on, which is, you know, what's happened to some of our technical education, and you know, why is it not, does it not sit at the same level in terms of prestige? Particularly when you look at the outcomes and the earnings data for people who do the higher levels. So I think you know, of course, Allison is influential in the sector. She luckily enough, you know what she thinks, because she's written it down several times, and you can all read it, and it's consistent. And you know, of course, things do move on, but I think it's fair to say, you know, that the Prime Minister and the Secretary of State, you know, in particular, have demonstrated that this is the time for real focus on further education, technical education, the other 50%, which up to now has probably not had as much focus as it ought to, and the timing can never be better, in my view.
Before we hear from the Shadow Skills Minister, I wonder if we can save a word for the digital boot camps.
Yes.
Because from my perspective, I think this is the newest part of the Lifetime Skills Guarantee, or perhaps more specifically the National Skills Fund future. Now, I looked into the digital boot camps, and there have been pilots, but as I understand it, it seems that they've never been called digital boot camps before. In fact, in the pilot, the West Midlands Combined Authority called it Beat the Bots, and they had £5 million which they distributed amongst 10 providers to deliver IT courses. So I'm not entirely clear how different this is going to be to the adult education budget spending, which will raise no doubt questions about whether we might be looking at sort of duplicate funding streams. But I wonder if you could just kind of talk a little bit about these, because I know it's been piloted and it's going to be funded from the National Skills Fund, and it's looking into other engineering, construction, potential other sectors. If you could kind of let us know about these digital boot camps.
Well, I mean, as a delivery mechanism, I mean, you know, it is quite a common mechanism, possibly not through the DFE and through our sector, but I mean, I've certainly been on many boot camps, including an entrepreneurial summer school one summer, if you're looking to set up your own business. So, you know, it's really, there have been pilots, and it's building on those pilots, 12 to 16 weeks. So it's quite an intensive training, actually. And, you know, really it's trying to get, you know, people to to get some quite valuable skills at pace, which will lead them to employment in the digital sector and in digital-based roles in particular. So that's the focus. So it's been looking at, you know, what those sort of mid to higher level kind of roles could be, and how you could get somebody quite quickly in a 12 to 16 intensive kind of period up to the right level. So there have been, you know, what's it there for? It's there, I guess, as another delivery mechanism in terms of, you know, it's a short burst, you know, maybe you're between jobs, maybe you're looking for that, you know, something to do to get yourself quite quickly into this skill level. So it's really focused on that. And if we can get a delivery mechanism which we can roll out, which is successful, you know, where people potentially now with this, you know, disjointed element of, you know, the handbrake on the economy coming almost overnight, which will have, and then the furlough scheme and changes to the things that you would never believe actually would be drivers of, you know, potentially people becoming unemployed. It could be that this is a good delivery mechanism for people to take those 3-4 months whilst other elements of the economy recover, and, you know, intensively get the training. And if they are successful, we'll try them in construction and engineering. For people looking to particularly switch careers, they could be a good route if you've got some skills, but you really want to, you know, build on those in a quite a valuable way. That's the approach. So yeah, I hope they should be successful. I mean, I've done this kind of thing before, and they are, if you've got the time to do them.
So many exciting policy developments. We've not even mentioned the skills toolkits. For another time. Thank you, Gillian.
You're always a bit sniffy about the skills toolkit, Nick. Don't think it hasn't. I haven't noticed your sort of tortuous use of the word platform and not liking it when we use anything that's that doesn't say free. I think
it's a great idea. I just wish you'd got £5 million like Nick Gibb had to create the Oak Academy to do some fresh new content. It would have been great for the FE sector to have got £5 million to create fresh new online content. So don't get me wrong, curating content is all well and good, but actually seeing some hard-earned cash for FE sector, I would always want.
Yeah, no, I know that's the objective, but if I just want to say what we were doing effectively, you know, the economy went into lockdown, we had a load of people go on furlough, and the whole objective was, what can we do that enables people to use that time wisely? We're anticipating this. What can we get together, you know, really quickly? And that was the objective, really, to build something. And it was more successful than we thought, which is why we're now building on it. And, you know, it can be built on with time and money. We will always do the right thing if it's got value to add.
Absolutely. Great idea. Even better with some cash. Gillian, thank you so much for your time. Please do stay for as long as you want.
I'm going to listen to Toby, of course.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So, Toby, well, Gillian's done the introductions for me. Thank you. You are fairly fresh-faced still, Shadow Skills Minister. We've seen you a few times now pop up asking questions in the House of Commons, and you've featured quite a few times in FE Week, all of which I'm very grateful for. So really looking forward to hearing your contribution. And then we will hear from a former Skills Minister, Gordon Marsden. So before then, Toby, if we can hand over to you.
Well, thank you very much, and it was good to hear Gillian's optimism about the future, and prior to coming on to the call, to hear from other people's sense of optimism, and I think, you know, hope about the fact that the sector is being very much talked about. I mean, it would have been remarkable, given the scale of the jobs crisis that appears to be heading down the track, if skills didn't play a considerable role in the government's response to that. But I think it is welcome, and to start entirely on a positive note, it is welcome that we are seeing a detailed sort of discussion, a recognition that the current regime isn't working. Now, one of the things that Gillian said that I thought was interesting and notable was that all the people on the call know what a lifetime skills guarantee is. And I'm interested when we pick up in discussion whether that is true. Gillian seemed to have a pretty strong idea about what it ought to look like. And I think that, you know, certainly something that is modular, certainly something that you are able to revisit at different stages of your career, is going to be very welcomed. I think it's something that is you're able to utilise in a bite-sized fashion is incredibly important. I think that, you know, we have policy being developed at a moment of crisis that needs to be responsive to that crisis, that needs to try and predict the world post the crisis, but also needs to address many of the inherent issues that existed long before the crisis. And I think that's a huge challenge for government. And Gillian was bullish that the structural change that isn't entirely, well, isn't remotely defined as far as we can see it, she may be able to see it, but we can't see it, is one that is going to make us proud. And I hope that she is right, of course, in that. But I mean, I have to say that, you know, much of what I'm listening to in terms of what we want to get away from and what we want to go towards are things that my party have been saying over the last 10 years. And I'm sure Gordon will have listened to much of Gillian's contribution with a rueful smile, because I've been there on the backbenches when Gordon was saying many of these things over the course of the last few years. So I think it is, in terms of what the challenges that need to be addressed, and I have, you know, a really healthy degree of scepticism about this government's ability to come up with structures that make it clearer for employers and for the further education sector, and indeed for learners, about the paths that they should be pursuing. I think, you know, we've got an incredibly fragmented approach already, and you know, if we end up coming out of this with a structure that is much easier for everyone in the sector to engage with, then that will be something immensely to be welcome. But I will believe it when I see it, in terms of the history that there's been so far. And I think what I'd like to hear a lot more on is, you know, firstly, how is the government going to ensure that there's a role for small businesses, small employers within our skills and apprenticeship regime? I think that far too much of it over the last few years, sort of since the apprenticeship levy particularly, has been designed around apprenticeships for the major employers. And the JCBs, the Rolls-Royces of this world are incredibly important in terms of our skills, but they are not the beginning and the end of the story. And I think there's far too little in place to support SMEs, both in terms of the bureaucracy, in terms of its relevance to them, and in terms of ensuring that they are able to afford it and feel engaged with it. I think the other thing I'd like to learn much more about is, and this points to something that Ali was speaking about earlier, is where does this fit in terms of any devolution agenda? Because, you know, it is remarkable the extent to which we have a government now that seems to stand in opposition to the government that many of these people stood in only a couple of years before. But there was a real sort of sense of drive behind devolution a few years ago. My sense is that the current regime is much less enthusiastic about devolution. And I think Ali's absolutely right to say, you know, what coronavirus has taught us and what we absolutely know from a skills perspective is that we need a skills regime that's driven locally, that's relevant locally, that looks at the labour market that it has, that looks at the learners that it has, that looks at the unemployed, the number of unemployed and where they're coming from and what skills they're arriving with, and is relevant to that. And you know, and so when I hear so little about what this new regime is in terms of its relationship with localities, then I'm very concerned about it. And certainly I would like to see something that works very closely with its local employer market, with its local provider market, and in its local context, and with its local political devolved authorities as well. And then, you know, careers guidance, I think that is something that I feel incredibly strongly and passionately about, because I think it is one of those areas that this government hasn't valued over the course of the last 10 years. I think there were criticisms to make of the previous regime, but to take an axe to it in the way that it has, with so little replacing it, I think has been a monumental mistake, and has massively damaged social mobility. And I think, you know, when you meet young learners in some of these communities, it's not that they don't have aspiration, it's that they have no awareness of what to aspire to. And so the lack of careers guidance within that is incredibly important. And I have no objection to the pursuit of T-levels, but I'm very worried that what we're going to see is that this government will fall in love with its own invention, and, you know, put far more effort and energy into something that is touching upon a tiny proportion of all learners at the expense of the thing that the vast majority of learners are doing. And so I will be attempting to sort of bring them back to an awareness of where the majority of learners are at this moment in time, whilst they try to develop their attractive new qualification. And I think in terms of the independent providers, I think there needs to be a real recognition of the value of many of those independent providers. You know, I absolutely want to see colleges playing a central role, but it shouldn't be that the independent providers are only there in order to do the things that colleges don't want to do. I think that choice is a good thing, both for employers and for learners. And I think it is important, you know, this isn't about some kind of sort of false sense of competition, but I think there is some value in an element of choice for different in different localities. And so, and you know, none of that should be taken as in any way suggesting there shouldn't be a fierce commitment to standards and to ensuring that higher standards are delivered, and those providers who aren't fulfilling that, you know, should improve or find there's no role for them. But I don't foresee a role, an environment in which only where the role of the independent providers is purely to do the specialist work, where the colleges, where it's not appropriate for colleges. I think they should work hand in hand collectively with the colleges. And then I think the other big question with all of this is, to what extent are we in an entirely new era in terms of funding? You know, there is an obvious need at this moment in time for government to spend money, and they're sort of starting to do so, although I think not half as ambitiously as maybe they think they are, but there is obviously a need to spend money at the moment. Is that something they're going to stick to for the 5 years of this, or 4.5 years of this parliament? Are we going to see a fundamental shift back to the kind of level of funding that our further education sector needed and was able to enjoy in the early part of this century? Or when the financial pressure comes on, as it inevitably will do with the size of deficit we have, is FE once again going to be seen as the poor relation? And will you see, you know, there's big money available for the shiny new qualification institutions that the government have created, but the core of the FE sector continues to be squeezed. And so I think those are the challenges that I will be holding the government to as they look to develop this policy. You know, I hope we've made clear that we are excited by if there is a genuine move to towards a more skills-based approach, but we will be holding government that we question the competence of in a variety of ways to account to deliver in those kind of areas.
Thank you, Toby. That really interesting stuff. It's striking. We're at a really interesting time in terms of policy development. As I say, I've been following this when in the college and since as a reporter, and feels a little bit back to front. I wonder if that's Boris Johnson rushing to get policies out to be seen to be doing something at the moment. Fair enough, but policies which aren't perhaps quite yet ready. It's a really interesting time to be talking about them as they're being announced, but the white paper hasn't yet been published. So all of us a little bit scrabbling around to kind of fill in the blanks and try and influence something, although there isn't a formal way or consultation to do that, which I think is unfortunate. It would be great if there was an actual, we used to have consultations every other week and I'd complain about them every other week. Now I feel like we're missing an important part in here. Gordon, you were Shadow Skills Minister over 7 more years and would have seen a lot of those consultations, and along with who can forget all those white papers that we had back in 2006, 2007. So you'll have seen all this before. We don't have long left, I apologise. We do have 4 other people to get in the next kind of 10 minutes or so. So if I can just ask for some kind of feedback and also what comments you'd like to bring, but in a fairly rapid fashion would be really appreciated. Yeah.
Okay, well, yes, obviously, as you know, Nick, you've spent 10 years covering this sector. I've, over those 10 years, done the same, but obviously with the HE thing. I mean, I think it boils down really, and I absolutely endorse everything Toby has said about the importance of the SMEs. You know how often you and I and everybody else have banged on about that in the case of AELP, the careers guidance again, and the devolution agenda. And I was amazed, actually. I was amazed that the minister, who said lots of nice and encouraging words, never even addressed that issue. And this is what worries me a great deal, that we've still got this micromanagement system, progression and pipeline. Who's going to teach these technical things at levels 4 and 5 and 6? We've got no detail on that. There's been no consultation or discussion with local leaders about, I mean, demand is as important as supply, and you know that as well as I do. In terms of money, I mean, we should be applying some of that money now to deal with, and City and Girls have talked about this, to deal with those training hubs and that. And also, who are these skills going to be for? We know what the economy of the future is going to be like in some ways. It's going to have far more self-employed people. It's going to need far more short-term stuff being done, which is why the modules things is good, but also other things as well. We're going to have lots of self-employed people. So we've got to think about the skills that they want to have, as well as just it being a sort of ratchet for existing employers. And we've also got to make sure that when we have things, and all of these things incidentally, were covered in the Lifelong Learning Commission that the Labour Party produced last year, in which various chunks of which were pinched by the Tories thereafter. But the one thing that they that they really have not focused on is actually going with things that are working. And that's why this thing in the last week, and it's complete chicken feed compared to the sort of money, the way in which the Union Learning Fund, which has actually produced, taken 250,000 people and skilled them, is just going to be dropped. It's chicken feed, and I have to say that I think that Gavin Williamson's way of presenting this has been very ignorant and actually very spiteful. The other thing is, we need to look at what's going on in the other nations. And those are the sorts of things. The final thing I would say, loans, yeah, loans are fine. But I know, you know, Nick, what happened to the advanced learning loans and the take-up from 2013 onwards. We've really got to think about what we can do, what we may need to do to give people in particular areas and with particular disadvantages some form of funding to take these things forward. We actually need an adult skills white paper, as Adrian Adamson from UVAC is advocating today, because if it's simply an FE white paper and it doesn't take on board those broader issues, which Allison Wolfe is very fully aware of, it will be a huge lost opportunity.
Thank you, Gordon. Really interesting. I'm amazed you didn't introduce, and we won't do it right now, but you know, I hope you will take ownership of the skills accounts idea when that announcement comes. I know that Alison Wolfe is keen on the idea of sort of personal learning accounts, and you've been pushing that agenda for some time. There's probably not time to go through that now. we haven't really heard it from a policy perspective yet, but we do know that Allison Wolfe is quite keen on agency and giving the sort of power to adult to kind of determine how they spend the money, particularly when they have access to that money in their younger life.
And she's right to do so.
Before we bring in Chowen, who is, of course, the East and West Midlands Area Director for the Association of Colleges, I know that David wants to just come in with a brief comment, if that's okay. David from NCFE.
Right, great. Thanks, Nick. And I will keep it very brief. So this was just a point, particularly while we've got the Minister on the line, and it's around the agility and responsiveness of the system, not just for the lifetime guarantee at level 3, but more broadly. We just in the last year, as an awarding organisation, have worked with training providers who've been very close to employer needs, needs of particular communities, and in that time, developed programmes in understanding climate change and environmental awareness, suicide awareness and prevention, cancer support, adverse childhood experiences, all of which have been developed in a very, very rapid timescale to meet an immediate, emerging and very pressing need. So I think it's hugely important that we do maintain that responsiveness and agility in the system for level 3. And then the only other point on that is the sort of teacher person to fish skills that are more important than ever, complex problem solving, critical thinking, judgment, decision making, emotional intelligence. And so I think we've got to be really careful that we don't just always sort of assume that a programme is from one occupation to another or one level in an occupation to the next. Skills gaps, massively important, but also skills shortages that hold people back in terms of getting an interview, getting a job, progressing in a job are hugely important as well. So I just think it's that can sometimes be lost in the mix, that agility and responsiveness in the system, the meta skills piece, and then the cross-cutting skills.
Thank you, David. Great point you're making there. Shane, apologies for keeping you, and we're going to hear briefly as well from the Association of Public Learning Providers in the form of Paul Warner and Jane Hickie. Before we do that, Shane, obviously you represent your member colleges, further education colleges in the Midlands, East and West. Yeah, from the things you've heard, from what you wanted to say in terms of the reform agenda, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. So I've sort of got two hats. I'm a governor of a large FE college group in London as well, and I've been an agitator in this sort of space for a number of years, so I've had quite a lot of time to think about it. I want to agree with everything I think that everyone has said about how it feels like we're in a moment right now with technical education, FE and colleges being in, if you're into political theory, a sort of Overton window of things that are sort of popular and acceptable at any given one time. And it would be a real shame, I think, to not capitalise on that even further. So the first of 3 points that I wanted to come along and make today was that as much as we welcome a lot of the initiatives that are being brought in at the moment and the extra funding that's coming with them, it still feels like we're missing, I think, an overarching vision for a lifetime education system. And I might be going a little bit sort of off script here, but I would absolutely love it if a party leader, Secretary of State, a shadow Secretary of State, a candidate for mayor who's running in the mayoral elections next year, to say, for example, within the next 5 years, we're going to eliminate basic skills deficits in this particular area. So it'd be great if Liam Byrne or Andy Street, for example, were to pipe up and say, within 5 years, 10 years, we are going to eliminate adult literacy and numeracy deficits in our area. We don't have an inspirational vision around this area at the moment, and I really think we could do with that, and I think it would make a lot of difference. Second point was around every adult needs a chance. I'm coming at this in a little bit more of a strategic way and focusing in on some of the lower level stuff, because there's been quite a lot of talk about the level 4, 5, 6 stuff at the moment. I don't know if anybody saw the write-offs. It was on Channel 4 recently. Sandy Toksvig did a programme with a group of adults who had low levels of literacy. Anyway, if you haven't seen it, go and watch it. It was not just incredibly inspiring, but I think really does paint a picture about how incredibly important it is not to forget about the lower level adult ed stuff as part of the conversation around a lifetime skills guarantee. Not just because it has tons of intergenerational benefits, and one of the individuals involved in that program read to his daughter for the first time, and there wasn't a dry eye in the country. It was, it was so emotional and really important. But on some of these programs, they have a sort of what they did next sort of thing at the end. There were people who had just learned to read and write properly, starting businesses, getting good jobs, doing higher level courses at college, So we shouldn't forget that it's the lower level courses that are going to be the pipelines for this level 3, 4, 5 stuff. And I do feel like that's been sort of missing in the debate today. So it's, I think it was Olga that said the system needs to work for every adult. So we can't forget that. The reinstating level 3 is a great step, but we need that vision to go alongside it. The next point around that, I think, is around employer incentives. I think we've got quite a good, we're quite articulate around some of the incentives that can be provided within a short period of time, like the apprenticeship incentives right now at the moment, for example, are very good because we're in a bit of a crisis situation. But I think we could do with some more thought around how we could really bed in some structural rewards and incentives for employers so that they can plan a bit more further ahead, you know, baked into the corporate tax system or something. I think we can be looking a little bit more, we can have some better aspirations around employer incentives to help us get the investment in the sector, but also giving people the time that they need. You know, you could go as far as legislating for study leave if you wanted to. And the final point was around, others have mentioned this idea of a coherent system. So that obviously has to include pipelines from lower level to higher level. But I also think it needs to distinguish between some really clear roles for people. So I was a bystander in the debate, Nick, you had with Tom Richmond around this role of the FE directors being planned. I thought that was really interesting, and representing a region like the Midlands, I could see what a role like that would do in say the West Midlands, and the mayor sort of does that. But I don't know what that person would do in somewhere like Greater Lincolnshire or rural Derbyshire, for example. So a lot I think to clarify around the MCAs, the LEPs, the SAPs, everyone. There's a lot of people operating in this space, and I think we could do with some coherence in the system.
Yeah,
so,
just the other week, as you've seen, just the other week, FE Week threw in the Chambers of Commerce, as we understand it, is very much being looked at as a potential player in the absence of, say, a UK CES that was scrapped about 5 years ago. Thank you, Shane. That's really interesting. I want to just pick up on one point there, because I know it's something that Jane and Paul, I suspect, will want to mention, which was your point about level 2. So we've heard about the full level 3 entitlement, but if we're to coin a phrase, the ladder of opportunity, I know our chair of the Education Select Committee has kind of ended up making that kind of fairly standard parlance. This ladder, certainly firstness at level 3, but are we ensuring that the level 2, first full level 2s are for all ages as well? And if not, why not? Why they're not at the moment for first full level 2s for all ages, so shouldn't that form part of the guarantee? So that's something that I'm sure we'll return to with the Minister and others. But we have super limited amount of time, but I did want to make that point about the lower levels because it is a big AELP agenda. But now I want to hear what it is that the Chief Executive of AELP would like to contribute to the roundtable. So saving the best till last, did I say it out loud? Jane Hickie, over to you.
Loud enough.
Over to you.
Okay, thank you. I mean, just to start, I'm going to pass to my colleague Paul to talk more specifically about apprenticeships. But as a starting point, it's been really good to hear everybody talking about a skills ecosystem. So actually all of us working together, bringing colleges, providers, so not just talking about colleges and representing the members of AELP, the majority of whom are ITPs. It's a very welcome discussion. Just as a first point, if the lifetime skills guarantee is the centrepiece of the FE reform white paper, then it needs very much more to recognise the role of ITPs. And actually, I sit on the stakeholder group for the white paper. It does not talk about ITPs. It talks about colleges. It is very college centric. So that's something which really does need to be addressed. I'm also going to take this opportunity to talk about a current and very, very serious problem that we've got in the system, which is 45,000 apprentices who are stuck, unable to take their functional skills qualifications, which includes 5,000 adult learners. Now, if this white paper is talking about improving opportunities for people, giving young people and adults better opportunities, we're currently in a situation where we are not allowing 45,000 people to get through to their qualification to be able to go to endpoint assessment. So I have written to the Minister about that issue. What we need, we are urging the Minister to actually persuade Ofqual and the DFE to take us back to a place where we can actually work with centre assessed grades. I have had some alarming conversations with officials about why cannot every apprentice be given a laptop
it simply doesn't recognise the system or how it works, or the fact that employers, we have a number of employers who are simply not allowing training providers to go onto their premises. We have people like Health Education England who cannot allow training providers to go onto their premises. So the appeal for from AELP and its members is, can we please take a look at this current and very pressing issue about functional skills qualifications and make some provision for a return to centre assessed grades. So I think I'd like to pass to Paul to pick up on apprenticeships, if that's okay, Nick.
Yeah, no, if we could just briefly, because I'm conscious of time, but also that in terms of the topic of debate, apprenticeships wasn't really a particular focus, but if there's something in particular in apprenticeships you wanted to add, Paul?
Yeah, well, just to sort of try and bring things together a bit, really. I mean, the clue is in the title with what we've been talking about. We've been talking about a lifetime skills guarantee, and there's been quite a few mentions made of a wider ecosystem about the fact that it's not just about any one particular type of institution or any one particular type of provider. It's about awarding organisations, independent colleges, all of it together. The thing about the lifetime skills guarantee is it really should be treated not as a program. I think there's a bit of a danger that we may end up just seeing this as the latest shiny new thing that gets followed up and then as an initiative drops off the end of something later on. It's not a program, it should be an approach. It needs to recognise this wider ecosystem. Now, the Prime Minister said at Exeter College that we need to invest in FE, and that is not just adults, that's not just level 3, that's not just classrooms, it's not just colleges, it's all of it. It means not getting sidetracked down these little siloed routes, but recognising that the sector as a whole has moved mountains in a very short space of time at the moment in order to make things right. And actually there is a very real and not a contrived momentum to go further and change things while we're in the mood to do it, because we've had to do so much. So this isn't a politically confected drive for change. This is something that really everybody wants to get behind. Now that means also that we can't ignore in the context of this, that we do need to properly support, as Gordon Marsden said earlier, for example, SME apprenticeships. We do need to have a look and make sure that we don't let those drop off a cliff. We need to make sure that we're supporting apprenticeship wages against what I think is rapidly turning out to be the inadvertent competition of the Kickstart programme, because although the government have said these are different programmes, these are different cohorts, actually Kickstart is already elbowing apprenticeship opportunities out the way. We are seeing it from employers at the moment. And it's also very much about, as you said, Nick, it's about ensuring that those seeking first level 2s aren't left behind either.
Any thoughts, Paul, on obviously level 4 and 5 is the big push with this policy and the future legislation? Any thoughts? Would be great to have some final thoughts around. We haven't talked too much about the higher levels. Any thoughts about level 4 and 5 in the context of the kind of industrial strategy and what comes next? Institutes of Technology, all these policies that are being brought in under the guise of the kind of white paper that we're all eager to see.
Well, I think again, it needs to, as has been mentioned several times, we need to really talk about it as a coherent whole. We can't afford to talk about this just as a programme in its own right. You're absolutely right. Level 4, level 5 and the higher level apprenticeship programmes or any of the level 4, level 5 programmes do need a bit of focus on, but we need to have the HEIs around the table and we need to have them talking in an open fashion as well about how that ladder of opportunity, when it reaches those levels, how is it actually going to work? If we really want to break down what the PM said about this arbitrary distinction between academic and vocational, that means we have to look right up the ladder and we have to make sure that what we are not doing and what we're not tempted to do is just rebadging degrees as something work-based when they're not really. It's just everything is meeting at the top. We've got to have proper choice within the system. We've got to have a proper parallel ladders of learning styles that people can follow. But that has to be taken into account. And I just really worry that by concentrating on a lifetime skills guarantee, that it ends up being seen, as I said at the beginning, just as a programme, and it's not, it's an approach. And that has to include all of it.
Okay, thank you, Paul and Jane. I really appreciate your contributions. I'm conscious that there's a lot of people on the round table, and it was important we heard from everyone. I hope it was useful hearing from everyone, but also particularly an extended session there, which did eat into time somewhat, but to have the skills minister on the line. You don't get that many opportunities. Toby gets an opportunity now and again if they remember to be in the House. In the case of Gavin Williamson, gets an opportunity to ask them questions in Parliament. And so to have her on the line and be able to ask her those questions, I trust was of interest and of use, and it was great certainly to hear from all of you as well. I wonder, David, as NCFE, very grateful to your sponsorship, everything you've heard there, I wonder if you could give us some closing remarks.
Yes, I'll keep it fairly brief, Nick, just to say a huge thank you for everybody for participating, because we appreciate it that we haven't got more time because we're not commuting as much. These times we seem all to be busier than ever, so people giving up the time to come and have what hopefully has been a useful discussion, and what I think is a very important debate is very much appreciated. I'd be quite keen to hear from people, speak to us directly or via Nick and Shane if there are other specific topics that you think these types of conversations, this balanced debate that we've had today are useful. We're more than happy to put our resources behind this, because we want the best possible outcomes for learners, we want the best possible outcomes for the system, as we all do. And I think sometimes, these sort of convening platforms can be incredibly useful to have that debate and discussion. So I've certainly found that interesting and useful. I hope everyone that's joined in today has done too, and really appreciate from an NCFE perspective you all taking the time.
Thank you, David. Well, I probably should have mentioned at the start, we have recorded the entire session, so if you've been scratching your head in an unfortunate fashion, that is captured for posterity, and we will be sharing the recording, although we weren't broadcasting live, we will be sharing the recording publicly, so please do share that amongst your colleagues and networks, friends, family, cats, dogs, whoever else you think should see it. And I'm sure we will, thank you, David, I'm sure we will be following this up. It's clearly a very busy time. Shane Chowen mentioned this as well, busy time on the policy front. FE very much front and centre. At the moment, every other week I get another survey from another organisation telling me that FE should be, and other people think it should be, right up there in terms of policy priorities. I strongly suspect that one of the reasons why we don't have as much detail as we would like from government right now is because there is a lot of activity ahead of a spending review going on, and the Department for Education is, I hope, trying extremely hard to lock down a lot of money to back up a lot of these new policies, whilst at the same time trying to introduce policies. So it's all a bit confusing, and I hope today that we've tried to unpick some of that and bring a bit of light where there might have been dark. And I'll stop with my metaphors because I'll get in a right old tangle if I carry on. So on that note, can I thank everybody that joined us? I won't read out the very long list again because that will take a very long time. But everyone has contributed in a very valuable way. So once again, thank you to you. Thank you to everyone who is perhaps now watching this instead of Netflix or whatever else you could be doing. I hope it's proven a good use of your time for the last hour and a half or so. And on that note, I'm going to rely on my colleague Shane to end this broadcast. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you from FE Week.